You are listening to the Lawyer Stories podcast with host Benny Gold. Lawyer Stories was founded in July 2017 and is an expanding global network of lawyers and law students sharing their personal journeys to the noble profession of the practice of law. Join us on this podcast as we dig deeper into these stories and hear from lawyers and law students from around the world in all areas of the legal profession. Here at Lawyer Stories, we believe that every lawyer has a story. What's yours?
Welcome to the Lawyer Stories podcast with
Good to see you.
Gold. Hi, how you doing?
Good. It's great to be here.
Thanks. And today we welcome in Ben Sachs, consultant at the Landing Group, law professor at UVA, and now author, congratulations on that, of All Rise, Practical Tools for Building High-Performance Legal Teams.
Yeah, it's
Welcome
a mouthful,
in, Ben.
isn't it?
What's that?
It's a mouthful, isn't it?
No, it's awesome. I want to ask you a quick question about the book before we get into like your background a little. So the term like all rise, like obviously refers to like when a judge comes into the room and like they're, the marshal or the deputy says all rise, right? So like, is there any connection between that and the content of the book, or you just kind of like the phrase?
Well, I think the idea is basically that if you're going to build a great legal team, if you really know how to build a strong legal team, a strong culture, build up your legal organization, as you rise, all rise. And I know that sounds a little corny, but that's
awesome. I didn't even think of it like double like meaning like that. That's cool.
Yeah. It's something I feel passionately about. The other issue too is there's so much respect for the law. Like there's no other profession. When someone walks in the room, everybody is required to stand up. That's so rare. That's right. And it's because lawyers hold a certain place in society. But we often don't accord managers that same requirement. Like we don't expect managers to act with the same level of diligence all the time. They don't always necessarily come in with the same level of gravitas. And I feel like that's a mistake. If we're going to maintain this level of dignity in the world, we need to think about how we act in our firms, in our legal teams, and so on. So I'm trying to punch above our weight a little bit as lawyers, becoming managers and leaders.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I love that that phrase and the title for a book. So let's start with your background just a little bit. Like, where are you from, and like, why did you decide that a legal career was for you at the time?
Yeah, that's funny. So I guess I have to go back to college. I joined, of all things, the mock trial team in college, and that was really fun. They were super competitive, really intense group, and it absolutely got me interested in becoming a lawyer. But when I went to law school, I thought the goal would be to become a trial lawyer.
Right.
And lo and behold, you go into big law, not a lot of trial law happening.
Right.
Not a lot of trial opportunities. So that is what first got me thinking about maybe there's another path for my career. I like the law, but like, how could I pivot this into something that really spoke to me? And I ended up going the business side.
So are you from Virginia or no?
I'm from Virginia Beach originally.
Virginia Beach, right. So when you went to law school and you joined mock trial, you said you were doing that, right? So like, what was your first job then out of law school? I mean, you said you wanted to learn how to do trials, and stuff, but then you ended up sort of doing something different. But what was your first job?
Sidley Austin. I was a litigator at Sidley for a year, and I'd already lined up my clerkship in law school. So the clerkship process so elongated. So I had my clerkship lined up before I even graduated. So I knew I'd be at Sidley for a year. Then I went to the clerkship, and it was during the clerkship where I started thinking about, do I go back to Sidley or do I try something different? And that's when I tried to do something different.
Okay, so what was it? Let's talk about what you did after that.
Yeah, I went to business consulting. I went to BCG, which is a big business consulting firm. You think of like McKinsey, Bain, BCG. These are the firms that do a lot of stuff. And so it was a real sort of 180 from the law. But my intention was, I'm going to go get some business experience. And if I love it, I'll stick around. But if I don't love it, that's fine. I'll go back to the law firm and I'll have a little bit of business background to lean on. But I actually really liked BCG a lot. If it wasn't for the fact they traveled 4 days a week, I probably would have stayed there. And that's changed a bit since I left. But I really got a lot out of the experience at BCG. And instead, I went to a tech company and I went even deeper into the business side for a couple of years.
So BCG, like, what is that? Do you see a lot of lawyers going over there at the time?
They are pretty good about that. They have sort of a thought process, which is, look, we can train you to do business consulting. We need the right kind of thinkers. Those come from MBAs, sure, a lot of MBAs, but also lawyers, PhDs, even medical doctors. they go to BCG, and they're actually really good about sort of incubating and teaching you the ways of that language and that style.
So
yeah, it was a lot of fun.
So I have a question. So like you always hear about people consulting, right? Like
Yeah.
in like whatever industry it is, like they want to come back and they want to like consult, whether it means they retire and they want to come back and consult like where they were prior during their career. Like can you I know I don't mean to sound like very like simplistic, but like what were you doing like as a consultant and in general, like what do consultants do when they go in there and work at these companies?
This is such an honest question. I mean, when I left the law firm to do BCG, people at the law firm were like, "What the hell are you doing? No, what do you have to teach business people? You've never done business. Like, what does this job even mean?" So the lawyers in particular are like, "What is that?" So the way I'd phrase it is, especially at BCG at that level or McKinsey or whatever, what they often are doing is they're going into organization and they are either going in under a partner who knows a specific area of business really, really well, and you're serving on a team to implement that idea. So for example, we went in and analyzed a huge grocery chain and figured out which products to take off the shelf to make more money, because it turns out giving people too many choices is annoying for a customer. That's like one really random thing, but the partner in charge knows that area so well they can build a team around it. But half the time, honestly, you're going in because the executive knows what they want to do, but it needs kind of an outsider to put a stamp on it before the inside team is willing to buy in. So half the time I felt like we were going in there to help give credibility to what an executive wants to do and sort of making a right turn for the business and giving sort of upping their game. Yeah.
What if you see something that you don't agree with, or like that?
Sure.
The way that they, okay.
No, you're always being honest. I mean, I think that you're always doing what you think is right. But I guess what I'm saying is, it's not that unusual that an executive wants to make a big change in a company. And the business consulting I do now, there's a lot of this. You know, the CEO will say to me, "Look, I feel like we're not data driven enough. How to become more data driven?" And so when they go and talk to their teams about, "Hey, let's build these dashboards," or, "Hey, we need to think about our goals differently," sometimes the team gets a little frustrated hearing it over and over. "Oh, it's just the CEO's opinion." You bring in an outsider who's seen this same thing done across 20 different organizations.
Interesting. Okay.
There's a different kind of credibility there. So I can say, "Look, I've seen this done. I can talk to you about it." And then you can help support and execute that strategy.
Okay.
It may sound a little bit like, what is all that? But when you really get in the weeds, it's about rolling up your sleeves and being like an extra pair of hands for a busy executive team when you got that experience.
Okay. All right. So, I mean, that takes a lot of obviously analytical skills, and that's so you told me a comment that like one of your coworkers made, like when you went from Sydney to like, Sidley over to BCG, but like, what was the experience like leaving a law firm and like going over to doing consulting?
I'll summarize it this way. I think I actually, so when I interviewed at BCG, there was a lawyer there who turned into BCG consultant. He said the hardest thing for him was the day that he did this analysis, and the analysis showed that the strategy was worth $10.2865 million.
Okay.
And the partner saw that number on the deck, the slide deck, and cut off everything past the 10 and said 10 million is close enough. That like blew the lawyer's mind. He's like, lawyers don't think that way. We don't round off. We don't get it close. We go very, very in a very precise way to whatever the answer is.
Right.
You know, when I was clerking, the judge would say, "That's an okay case. Can you find a better case for this point?" And I'm like, "We already know the point, and you're the judge. So we've already made the decision." But that level of precision,
you're the judge. Come on, man. Like you can weave it in. You can make it work.
Yeah. But the law and lawyers are really focused on that precision. Business consulting is very different. Business consulting is, what's the minimum I have to do to make a good decision, not how do I prove it to the umpteenth degree. And so that is actually, I think, the biggest transition point a lot of lawyers like struggle with. Like, how do I think that way? How do I think more in terms of efficiency? And it's not even the numbers. People talk about the numbers, but that's not the biggest issue. It's like business thinking and prioritization that a lot of lawyers struggle with.
Okay. And so you wanted to change, you wanted to try the business side of things, like and you liked it too. So how long did you end up there?
I was there about 2 years. I worked in the US and Australia for them.
Wow.
And then a friend of mine was sort of building out a startup, and he wanted somebody to come in who had some business experience. I thought that was me. It turned out I went into this new organization and I had no idea what I was doing. And he had to teach me everything again. So I felt like over and over in my career, it's like starting again with a new area and learning from the ground up, which has been a lot of fun. But Wow, it was a big learning curve for
What
sure.
what was he doing?
So it was a startup called Storyblocks,
Right. Okay.
and we sold to private equity a year and change ago, and they still exist. It's a great company. Basically, they sell stock media, like stock video, audio, images,
Interesting.
things like
Okay.
that. So I didn't know that industry. I didn't know much about marketing and a lot of these areas. I had a lot to learn, but it was a really cool company.
I mean, it sounds like now, after all these experiences, you're pretty well rounded with business and tech. I mean, you have some incredible experience. I mean, you worked at a big law firm. You worked at like a big consulting firm. You joined a startup, right? And so you got like all this knowledge working besides your friend. So
Yeah.
story blocks. So that's pretty incredible. What did you find in that was like your passion? Did anything come out of that that you were passionate about?
It's going to sound weird, but I think what I'm most passionate about is building out strong teams. And I know that that might sound like self-serving because the book is about building teams, but it's one of the same for me. I mean, when I was at Storyblocks, I wasn't just overseeing the legal work. We had almost 200 employees by the time I left. I oversaw the marketing team and the customer service team and the analytics team and the product team and the graphics team. And if you're trying to be effective in overseeing all these teams, when you don't have that expertise, right? I'm not like a graphic designer by training, and I'm trying to oversee the graphics team. You have to have a very different thinking about like how you build out a team, how you lead a
Right.
strategy, how you get people bought in and working hard. Like that to me was really fun. That was the fun part.
Okay. And that sort of leads to my next question. You see all these aspects about building a team, and you sort of, in hindsight, you could see how lawyers do it compared to how maybe like business people do it, who might have an MBA and like they're not thinking with like the legal mind. But there's so much that goes into like running a company. I was reading this like marketing, products design, analytics, customer service. So how do you feel lawyers actually fare in those areas?
In the areas like marketing and product and
Yeah, and
all.
product marketing, like, because I mean, it all comes a lot of that's a lot of what you have to do in a law firm. A lot of this stuff.
Yeah, that's really well said. I mean, I think that if you are the head of your own law firm, if you're going out there and opening up your own practice, you are forced to learn all of that, right? There's no one else to teach you it. When the internet goes down, you're the IT guy, right?
Right.
And a lot of lawyers, I think, actually don't get that practice because they go into a big firm. A lot of my peers went into big firms. All they sort of learn in that experience is their narrow area of the law. They learn
Mm.
some client skills and usually not for a couple of years. So I think that the folks who actually go out on their own, they get a lot more of that entrepreneurial spirit. They're forced to take on a lot more skills. I actually think marketing is a great example. I think lawyers are terrible at marketing. And understandably, why would you learn a skill you haven't had to use? Whereas if you're forced to learn it, you consume every bit of knowledge you can, and it's your practice, it's your baby, and it's your money. You're going to
Yeah.
make sure you do the best you can with it.
Yeah. Yeah. So Ben, like, what advice would you provide someone wanting to make the pivot from a legal career to tech or another industry?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I get this question from time to time from lawyers who want to do this. I mean, what a lot of lawyers think is I'll go in as general counsel to a company and I'll absorb a lot of business knowledge. I think, unfortunately, that doesn't happen as often as you think. They get the job, but the problem is at a lot of companies, the legal side of the organization is seen as just answering the legal stuff. They're not going to come to you and say, "What do you think about the business strategy?" They're not going to come to you and ask you for like bigger picture advice. They're going to say, "Hey, can we do this legally?" Or "What's the right way to frame this contract?" So in my opinion, I mean, if you do that and you really inject yourself and you really take the lead on your own career, you can get in those conversations, but you've got to be pretty confident. The way I did it turned out to be a little easier. When I went to BCG, it immediately gave me a little business credibility. So when I went to the startup after that, they didn't see me as a lawyer. I wasn't pitching myself as a lawyer who wants to dabble in business. I had 2 years of business experience. Now, little did they realize my business experience wasn't that relevant to a stock media startup. I think I still had a
Yeah.
lot to learn, and they
Right.
knew that. I'm sort of kidding, but at least that reset of going to a place like BCG where they give you a broad set of business training, like that segue, I think, gave me a different kind of credibility than a lawyer trying to go straight in-house.
Okay. So like a general counsel, for instance, would you say like a lot of them? It was interesting what you said about they don't come with you for like, hey, we need like a business strategy. They're not having you write their strategic plans. Maybe they do. I don't know. But Do you think a lot of general counsel have like outside counsel that they don't actually take on the case? They like farm it out to like a bigger firm, you know? Is that kind of how that works?
They do both. I mean, there's
Yeah.
certainly some general counsel I know who are very strategic, very involved.
Okay.
They're like the number two at some organizations.
Yep.
I just say it's more the exception than the rule. And in terms of outside counsel, I mean, I was general counsel at the tech company, and I outsourced as much legal stuff as I could because I was focused on the business side. I think a lot of general counsel, what they try to figure out is what's the right efficiency. I want to build out a legal team. It's cheaper to do it in house, and we know the organization, we know the risks, we know the priorities, so better to do it in house. But you build outside counsel relationships and you just kind of flex in and out of those. Like when I was at Storyblocks, if I needed somebody to answer an obscure question about Canadian employment law, why would I bother researching that? I can pay someone outside to do that faster.
Right.
So part of the general counsel job is figuring out which questions go to which side of the
Okay.
aisle in that sense.
Yeah. No, I get you. So Ben, like, what made you want to write a book?
Oh gosh. I'd thought about it for a while. I've been teaching lawyers for a while. I've been teaching law students. I've been doing consulting on the side. And the more I got asked to do seminars and do sort of consulting and advising for law firms, especially around this issue of like how do we take all the best practices from outside law about building teams and bring them into law firms? Like that was a common theme. I was like, we need a systematic approach. Like lawyers, there isn't really a textbook for lawyers about building out teams. There's no classes in law school for it.
Yep.
Virtually no law schools have classes on this, despite them being ubiquitous in other fields. There are books about leadership, don't get me wrong. There are books about management, there are a million of them. But lawyers, they don't resonate with lawyers because they don't understand the context of what it is to be a lawyer, especially at a firm. And so I felt like this gap was just like crying out to be filled. And I love teaching, and I really wanted to put these thoughts down on paper.
That's awesome. And you structure the book around trust, ownership, conflict, and accountability.
Yeah.
Those are four biggies, and they're all important. And you read trust, and we're like, we all know what trust is, but I think you have sort of a different idea when it comes to what trust is. If you want to share that with us, that'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, I think I often get asked about trust in two ways. One is people saying trust. This is this like, squishy subject. What does that even mean? And then you get some people like, okay, I get trust, but how do I actually build it? Like tactically, what's something I can, grab onto? I mean, the first group is sort of saying they're a little skeptical. There are a lot of lawyers, especially generationally, tend to be older lawyers, but not just older lawyers who think that trust is, a silly consultant word. I actually had a partner tell me recently, oh, this is all just woke consultant nonsense.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, but I love that. At least he's being honest, which is really important. So he's saying, okay, look, let's grapple with this. Like, why does trust matter? And I said, look, there's data on this. When Google went out to figure out what are the best predictors of a strong team, they have a people analytics division that just looked at all the data points for strong teams, looked at 100 plus teams, and they looked at GPAs and pedigrees and personality assessments. None of that predicted which teams would hit their goals. The number one predictor was whether the team had psychological safety. In other words, trust. And trust in that sense, psychological safety means, do I feel comfortable being myself, being vulnerable, which means like asking questions, means not being worried about looking stupid by asking the wrong question or saying I need help or I am making a mistake. Even giving feedback requires trust. I got to trust that you're not going to bite my head off and give you feedback. Like that trust is so central that it predicts success across the board.
Wow. So that's sort of the same thing as trust then? Or no?
Yeah, psychological safety, vulnerability, and trust are all interwoven. It's all kind of different shades of the same thing. And ultimately, what you're trying to do on your team is build trust. Like you express vulnerability, you don't build vulnerability. You demonstrate some vulnerability that shows people that they can trust you. You demonstrate psychological safety that shows they can trust each other. Trust is at the core of everything. And without trust, you can't get to the other stuff. Like you're like, I want to have more feedback in my team. Can't have feedback because they don't trust you. They don't trust you what you're going to do with that feedback. They don't trust your intentions. That trust is broken, so they're not going to listen to what you have to say about return to work or where your demands are with clients and everything else. You've got to have trust to start.
So do you think trust needs to be built, or somebody should go in there trusting their employees until they break it?
You got to build trust.
You have to
and this is where lawyers really have struggle, is they say, okay, like trust sounds good, but that takes time. It takes years to build trust, and we got to get to know each other. Who has time for that? I mean, a lot of lawyers are coming in and out of teams. You can't have trust be something that it takes 2 years to build over 1 million cups of coffee.
Right.
We need tactical ways to build trust on our teams. And there are ways to do that. And if you're systematic about it, you can get there faster, which is what the book is about. Is like, let's make this practical tool. It's not just a theory of teams, like how do we do it?
Do you have any examples, like off the top of your head, like to build the trust, or no?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, so
Okay.
one of the things we talk about is how differences in personality styles can affect your relationships at work. So, for example, I remember two lawyers who absolutely hated each other, and they thought each was incompetent. One thought it was a boss and a direct report, and one thought the boss was a micromanager. Oh, he doesn't care about my career; he only cares about the work, and so on. The boss thinks that the junior attorney is flighty, is always talking small talk instead of getting on a business. It turns out that their work styles are actually a reflection more of personality styles than anything else.
Okay.
So one of the things we'll do is we'll go into a team, we'll say, let's talk about personality styles. Let's all take a personality test. I don't care which one, frankly, like they're all fine.
Okay.
But talk about what your personality test says about you. You might think it sounds silly, but when they actually talk about on a deeper level, like who they are and how they work and their personality, suddenly they're like, oh, I see why you're this way in a meeting. I see why you tend to interrupt. I see why you tend to talk a lot, or you don't talk very much. You don't ask questions until the end. And all these little conflicts at work are actually owed more to personality and working style differences than anything else.
Wow, that's interesting.
So that's like one example, but like when you start unpacking how we work differently, it's easier to build trust. Like now I get, okay, like Benny is more of a guy who, likes to think on the fly and ask questions on the fly. Instead of waiting 6 months to learn that, why don't we talk about that on day one? Let's talk about how your personality affects your work. Let's talk about your work preferences.
Do people know, like, when you do something like, I think that's amazing, actually. Like, do people know the purpose behind that when you do it is to build trust, or do they just think like it's again, I don't mean this to sound simple, but do they think it's like an icebreaker type of thing? Like,
Yeah.
because sometimes they do those things just to, like, and I know, like, obviously big law, whatever, corporate, like, there's no time to do those, probably no time to do those type of things. But for me, it would be like, okay, we're just doing this exercise to like get to know each other better. But I think if people know the purpose of it, like then it starts to connect the dots a little bit, right?
Totally agree. I mean, if you're not standing up and explaining why you're doing the thing you're doing, a lot of lawyers are going to roll their eyes and be like, all right, this is like a fun, silly exercise. Like, who cares? So if, and also having a facilitator that's pointing out the nuances, like, wait a minute, you notice what Mike just said about his personality? Like, how does that affect how he approaches client development? And as you get people thinking about it, they start realizing, all right, there's actually a lot of nuance in here that's going to make me more effective working with my colleagues. And I'm skipping 2 years of get to know you BS and getting right to the heart of this relationship. Like, how are we going to work together effectively?
That's really smart. I like that a lot. That's more in the book, everybody. All rise, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff like that. And,
Yeah,
and look,
cool.
I'm not reinventing the wheel. Like, a lot of the stuff has been out there for a while. I learned things at BCG. I learned things from colleagues at Storyblocks. But these best practices are out there. A lot of lawyers aren't aware of them, don't know about them, and don't realize there's a systematic way to do this stuff. You don't have to always think on the fly. Like, there are great tools out there to use.
Yeah, I mean, it takes forever. I mean, I'm thinking about back to my office, like where I'm working. I mean, I managed a lot, like a bunch of people, and that's interesting to think. Like, if we actually did something like that, we'd all figure out how we worked quicker, the nuances, and especially like you were saying, standing up there and telling everybody this is like for a specific purpose. I mean, we're not just doing this so you can know what kind of a personality you have. This isn't like like some game on Facebook, so you can like figure out like if you have this color personality, that color personality, like this is like legitimately going to help us be more efficient as a team, right?
Yeah. Icebreakers are fine and happy hours are fine, but you want like real professional trust. You got to dig a little deeper and more purposefully.
Yeah, that's awesome. So something else you discuss is ownership, and I thought this was pretty interesting. Like, how do we build like a ownership mindset for an attorney? Like, how does that work? And like maybe give us a little insight into the book.
Yeah, I mean, for me, this comes back to one of my first days at BCG. When I was working on this case, we're all working long hours, and the partner comes in and says, you guys need to own the whole case. You need to own the whole case. I'm like, what does that mean? Like, I'm working long hours. Like, what does it mean own the whole case? And then later I'd hear the same thing, like, you got to think like a CEO. You got to think like a CEO. What does that mean? I think a lot of lawyers don't understand what that means. And so one of the things I try to do in the book is like demystify that stuff so that you don't have to wait 10 years to figure it out. The truth is, CEOs, what they know that no one else knows is that there's no one else to go to when something breaks. Like, it's that simple. Like, to be a CEO means that no matter what, the job has to get done and it's on you.
Right. Right.
Like we said earlier, like when, you're running your own firm and the internet goes down, it's you. That mentality is something that's hard for a lot of folks to just jump into. So in the book, I try to talk about this from the perspective of like when something goes wrong at your firm or at your team or in your agency or wherever you are. So let's say you've got a micromanager. It's like the classic example. And you're like, oh, I hate my boss, micromanager, it's awful. The ownership mentality says, all right, this is a problem. Instead of passing that problem off to the micromanager, it's like, oh, I wish they were a better manager. Or saying, wow, HR should fix this. Or my micromanager's boss should coach them better. That puts it on someone else. Say, how can I solve this problem? So it forces you to say, all right, look, well, how can I solve this problem? So for example, a micromanager, the one thing a micromanager cares about more than anything else is getting the job done well. So, okay, I've got to earn that person's trust so they stop micromanaging me. How do I earn their trust? And then you start breaking down the steps of like, all right, maybe instead of dumping the brief under their lap the night before and then getting a million comments the next day, I'll send them an outline on day one. I'll send them a draft of the first section on day 4, like get them a sense of my progress. And they're like, wow, like Ben's really like showing me that he's got this together. He's thinking ahead. He's looping me in and I'm earning that trust. So I know I'm like really in the weeds on this example, but the idea of ownership is whatever complaint I have about the team or the team member, I can flip that around and try to come up with something constructive I can do. And I go through a lot of examples in the book because I don't think this is easy for anyone.
Yeah.
But if you take that mentality to heart, you actually have a lot more power than you realize to control sort of your team's destiny.
Wow. And I was going to actually go into micromanaging now. That's something I personally, as a manager, as a boss, as an executive director, try not to do. I mean, I try to let people just sort of work and, do their thing, trust that it's getting done. So like, what advice would you have for a junior lawyer who is dealing with a micromanager? I know you just kind of gave us some with the outline of a brief. Yeah. Perhaps you could put it out there.
Yeah, I mean, with a micromanager, if you go back to like building trust, one of the things I talk about in the section on trust is like really believing that people around you have good intentions. So micromanagers, people often like, oh no, they're just terrible. No, they're not terrible. Like I said, they have a good intention, which is I want to make sure this gets done right. So your job is to think about how to show them that the work is safe in your hands. How can you show them the project is safe in your hands? So when I was at BCG, someone gave me this tip and I tried it and it really worked. I had a manager who was micromanaging from another city. Like they weren't even in my office and I had this problem. And they said, look, every Friday, send a 5-minute email to your boss and give them a quick rundown. Things I did this week, things I'm gonna do next week, roadblocks, things I need from you. And it was like a little bullet point list. I said, okay, I'll try. It took me 5 minutes every Friday. I sent 4 or 5 of these over 4 or 5 weeks. I never got a single response. Mm-hmm. I think what a waste of my time. This is totally silly. Then I get my review and she writes in my review, this weekly update was amazing. I never even had to reply because it just showed me that he's got the work safe. Wow. He's under control and I can focus my time on everyone else. I thought that was so funny because I'm like, I'm doing the same thing everyone else is doing. I'm just communicating it a little differently.
Right.
That little bit made a big difference. And then when I became a manager, I got it. I was like, oh my gosh, where the micromanager gets the most scared is when I'm like waiting and waiting. Like, I don't know if this is going to go well. I'm waiting for that deadline. Like the more you can communicate and get out ahead, the more the micromanager knows, okay, this person has it together.
Is that almost like raising your hand in a law school class before you get called on? Like that, I mean, you're a professor, like, I don't know, are you like calling on people? Like, is that
I do call on people,
like staying ahead of it before
it does kind of work. I gotta tell you, I've been tricked into that. I hadn't thought about that. That's exactly what my students are doing to me, isn't it?
Yeah, that's something else. I think that's also really smart. I love these these things that are in your book. So how does All Rise address like the need for further diversity and equity, in the workplace, and inclusion at law firms? How do you address that? I know you did address it, and I wanted to ask about it. Very important.
Yeah, I mean, it's huge. It's hugely important right now. It's been important for a long time. And in the wake of George Floyd, there's even more attention to this issue of like, how do we as law firms deal with the fact that we are consistently seeing too few women in partnerships, too few people of color in partnerships? How do we get to the point where we can improve that? And there are a lot of people working on this from a lot of different angles. But to me, like in this book, what I didn't want to do is say, and here's the chapter on diversity, equity, and inclusion, because I think that misses the point. The idea is it should be woven into everything we do. So if
Yeah.
you want to build trust, you have to think about, how do I build trust across differences? So talk about that in the book. Like, how do gender differences often affect our ability to build trust? Why is it that people who look like me, I'm a white male, why is it people who look like me with my background tend to find it easier to create friendships with people who look like me? Like, what is going on there? How can we be observant about it and be aware of it so that we can try to counteract some of those biases? And that's also true in ownership. It's true in conflicts. It's true in accountability. Every one of those traits, there are aspects to which our differences can affect our ability to get those traits onto our teams and to make that work. And if you don't think about that, if you don't talk about that regularly, if you sort of just stuff it into like a DEI seminar, it's not going to get the job done.
Wow. Okay. Have you ever like gone around speaking about these things? I think that would be very beneficial to law firms.
Yeah. I mean, that's a big part of my business now, to be honest. I mean, I do business consulting and I do law firm consulting now. And about half my work is working with big firms. I have firms on retainer where I work with every practice group and I meet regularly with them and we do trainings and we dig in on their problems. And I've got sort of bespoke stuff I do as well. I go to conferences. Like, this is an area of passion for me, and I've been working on it for many years. This book is sort of a chance to try to put it all together in a package that, even if you don't hire me or you don't have the budget to hire a consultant, which is fine, maybe this book can be a helpful way and a resource to get this stuff off the ground at your organization.
Yeah, I think so from what you've been sharing with us. So in the book, you do discuss needing like less management training and more team training.
Yeah.
So what's the difference there?
Yeah, so I was at a professional development conference last week. This is where the lawyers, professional development experts for law firms go, and they talk about, the latest. To me, I think a lot of people are still talking in the sense of management training, and that's, to me, is a problem. So to me, management training means we take all the 50-year associates or all the senior managers, and we pluck them out and we send them to a management training. And the problem is, they go to management training and maybe they get some interesting tips, but it's not tailored to their team. It's not tailored to their situation. And there's no like commitment. So if they get some tips they like, they might use them, but they go back to their day job and it's like they forget ever happened. So that's sort of cohorted management training. Team training is different. So when I go with law firms, most of my work is team training, where I pick a whole practice group. So let's say 40, 50 people in the New York office doing, litigation. And I study that team. So we do a survey, we do interviews, we identify the priorities, that team, and the gaps. I go to partners and I brief them and say, these are the issues. Everyone has to agree on these issues. Then we construct a training around those issues. But the training includes the partners. It includes the junior attorneys. It's not just a management training. Right. The whole team is there. And because we know what priorities we want to tackle, in the seminar, we are trying to figure out what action items that we as a team are going to adopt. So if we want to improve work-life balance, instead of some like random tips, we're saying, let's try these 3 things. Are we all agreed? All right, who's going to own this? How are we going to roll this out? Let's come back in 3 months and see if it worked. Like, you're actually getting commitment from the group to do this stuff, rather than just like, hey, here's some interesting tips. Try them if you want to try them. It's a totally different mindset. It's a difference. It's basically change management. Like, it's transformative change management. That's what we would call it on the business side, rather than training. Like, we need less training and more change management, in my view.
Gotcha. Love it. So tell us about the new world of work that you're also discussing, like the hybrid work.
Return to work. I mean, this has been tough. So are you working from home these days? What's your situation?
So I'm the executive director of 4 public housing authorities. So I have to go in and manage and, see residents and be with, so I don't work from home. If I need to, if I need to, I do, but I don't have a hybrid schedule or anything like that.
Are you working with team members who are also working in different places all the time?
Everybody works on location.
Oh, so
I mean, we don't have any
central office.
What's that?
You don't have like a central office?
We have a central office, yes, but we're not working from home.
So the folks who are dealing, the folks who are dealing with this hybrid work environment, what they're seeing is more and more that people are, post-COVID, even if they're coming into the office, they're like clocking in, clocking out. They're not sticking around for happy hours. Like back in my day, that's what we did. Stuck around for happy hours, got lunch. No, they clock in, they clock out, they do the work, they get out. So the connections are eroding at the office. And so a lot of law firms are looking at this going, all right, the solution is more time at the office. That to me is a mismatch. So I'll ask them. I was talking to an executive director at a law firm recently, and I said, why do you want to return to the office? We need to be more collaborative. All right. I'm not sure how you measure collaboration, but you had the best year you've ever had last year. So help me understand what the problem is, because associates see the same numbers I do. Like, you're telling me to come back to work. We need to be more collaborative, but we did great last year.
Right.
Well, we need to get back to the office to be more collaborative. Okay, well, when they go back to the office, are you measuring collaboration? Are you seeing that it was low last year and it's going to be higher now that you're back in the office? No, we don't measure collaboration. Well, what do you measure? We measure whether people clock in at the office. So think of how circular that is. I mean, they're saying we need to go back to the office to do something, but we're not going to measure it. And then when they don't show up, we're going to assume it's failing. It's like, what if everyone's in the office, but they're not collaborating? They're just clocking in, clocking out. We're not solving a real problem. So I think law firms have a lot of learning to do about how to make this work. And there are ways to do it. I mean, you can have an incredible remote workforce. You can have an incredible hybrid workforce for a law firm or anywhere else. You can also have an incredible in-person team, but you've got to be much more intentional in how you're building those connections and building your team. You can't just like rely on organic serendipity to do the culture for you.
I mean, I think that the pandemic and working from home really taught these big companies and big law firms something, especially if they were able to get all the work done. And I think it also is difficult for people who have been in an industry for like 30 years, older people who are about to retire, seeing people working from home, it's just sort of like they never, that's something that they never consider. So I think it's like, it's sort of I don't want to say generational thing, but I definitely think it's something that it came at an interesting time in history.
It is generational to an extent. I'm certainly seeing older lawyers struggling with this idea more.
Yeah.
But part of me is like, I don't blame them. I mean, think about you build a successful practice with 50 years of being in person, and then you remote. The smart comeback to what I said about we had a great year last year is, yeah, sure, we had a great year because we had 40 years of momentum with our teams. So 1 year, 2 years remote, we can hack it. But 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, we're not going to be able to operate at that same level. I think that's actually a good answer.
That is legit. Yeah.
Yeah. And so then I say, okay, great. So how are you making sure that in this new hybrid environment, you're carrying the brilliant stuff you did the past 30 years over? Because a lot of you weren't doing anything that brilliant in your 30 years for team building, just for team building. They're brilliant lawyers, but they were kind of letting it happen organically. So now that it's not happening organically because people are clocking in, clocking out, there's just a little more disconnection. What are you doing to be intentional about building that collaborative atmosphere? Like, don't just let it happen. You got to take command of your culture.
Right. Oh, that's very interesting. So Ben, what advice do you have for somebody wanting to write a book?
Oh gosh. Think real hard about whether it's worth the time. Look, I think writing a book was actually really fun. I think that it was helpful to think about it as a team sport. I mean, if you're sitting alone in a room writing a book, you don't have someone to compare notes, to think through the themes with you, to read it, to review it. I mean, I was really fortunate. I had a lot of good clients to work with and a lot of colleagues that were really engrossed in the subject matter too, and could like poke at it and push back and call me out when I said something that was wrong. I mean, I think without that, it doesn't get done, or it certainly doesn't get done well. So it really has to be a team effort.
Okay, that's good advice. So how do you like being a professor?
I love it.
Have you been doing it for a while?
Yeah, I try to remember the exact year. I've been doing maybe 10 or so years now at UVA. I'm an adjunct at UVA, and I taught public speaking in the past, but now I trade off between teaching negotiation and professional responsibility, which of course is legal ethics. And legal ethics is a lot of fun. You can imagine that gets some interesting conversations.
Yeah, definitely. Give us some, so if you taught public speaking, give us some tips for public speaking. You have a couple tips off the top of your head you could tell us?
Sure. Let's see. I mean, I think for public speaking, for lawyers, it's often about credibility, right? So we usually talk about public speaking from the lens of like, how can I be credible? How can I think about engagement, which is almost like that emotional connection, like connect with a story. Closing arguments are great about that. And then finally, logic. And lawyers all focus on logic. They're like, how do I create a nice, structured, logical argument? But they lose sometimes on the credibility and engagement. So for credibility, it's like, how can I think really carefully about my hand gestures and my voice and my ums and uhs? And for engagement, it's like, how can I weave a story into this instead of making it so vanilla? But those two things, to get them right, you've got to record yourself public speaking. If you watch yourself, I know it's painful.
It's, when I have a podcast come out, like
Yeah.
I usually, when I'm going to work, I'll have it on Apple and I'll like queue it up on Apple. I literally can't get past the first 30 seconds of my hearing myself before I turn it
No,
off, man. Like I
I
I
know
don't
it.
love it. I
I
don't
know
love hearing myself.
it's hard, and that's why a lot of people don't do it. But if you want to beat your competitors at this, so to speak, like you want to be the best in
Yeah.
your team, your whatever.
Yep.
Like that's what I think. If I try to tap into that competitive spirit of lawyers, like you want to do this really well, record yourself and watch yourself. You're the only one that has to watch.
Well, the video I do
You'll get
actually
better.
like to watch sometimes. Like I'll have a drink and I'll make my entire family watch a podcast.
I like
I'll
you got to
just joke
start with
around.
it.
I'll put it on for like 2 minutes and then shut it off.
I like you start with a drink though. You're like, I can't be sober for
Have
this.
have to. So okay, so that's cool. So coming full circle, like, sort of a, I don't know, simple but difficult question. Like, do you like where you're at as opposed to being at like we started off being in a big law firm. It seems like you're obviously a really bright, intelligent person who crushed law school. You went into a big firm, and so you're doing like kind of alternative stuff, but using that knowledge. You have business knowledge. You're a lawyer. How's everything going for you, Ben?
I'll be honest. I really love where I'm at right now, but I'm lucky. I mean, when I left Storyblocks, we had sold, and I was like, I'm ready for the next thing. I said, I'm going to try consulting for a year. And I was worried about money. I mean, how am what if I don't get clients? What if it doesn't work out? And I was fortunate that I built some client relationships quickly that really ballooned. And consulting is kind of fun. Like you have to deliver value. People know, they smell bullshit, right? So
Yeah.
if you're not adding value, they're like, thanks, but no thanks. And I was lucky that I had, I think, good client relationships early, not because I earned it, they were like friends made introductions or just one thing led to another. And I'm very fortunate. What I worry about as a consultant always is what happens if something changes, if there's a downturn or this or that, and we'll get tested around the corner, right, with the economic downturn. But yeah, I got to tell you, man, I love it. I love that every day is different. The problems are different. So I'm having a lot of fun.
That's great. Yeah, you could tell it. You definitely like emanate being satisfied and love what you're doing. So congratulations to you on finding that. Is there anything else that you'd like to say to the Lawyer Stories community? Any other tips, any advice, anything we left out?
I mean, I think we covered it. I guess I'll just say this. I mean, if you want to be an amazing lawyer these days, I think if your focus is how can I be the best at the legal stuff, look to your left, look to your right. There are a lot of people great at the legal stuff. If you want to really stand out in your career, you got to be bigger than that. You got to be thinking about the strategy of the practice, like you talked about with marketing and so on. And you've got to be good at building teams. Like that's how you get leverage. That's how you get power and profit in your business. So if you want to get that leverage, got to know how to build a strong team, one that can work hard under pressure and all that stuff. So invest in that part of your skill set just as much as the legal knowledge, and you'll go a lot further.
That's awesome. I love that. Ben Sachs, thanks for coming on. Author of All Rise, Practical Tools for Building High Performance Legal Teams. It's a great read. We heard a lot about it today. Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Stay right there. And wherever you are in the world today, enjoy yourselves. Cheers.